Okay, I think that's enough time for waiting for people to join. Let's just start. I'd just like to welcome everyone that's part of the session right now. Thank you so much for taking time aside to learn more about roadmaps in web development. I'd like to just acknowledge Rodney's presence. I see Rodney, we are with us. What's up, man? How you doing? It's good to have you. So Rodney is the previous DSC lead for this club from last year, and it's always good to have him, just advising us and just being there, in our events. So good to have you, man. How's it been?
It's been good. Thank you, Tinashe. Hi, everyone. Hope
Great
everyone's doing
stuff.
great and you get to enjoy the event.
Cool, cool. Thanks, Rod. All right, so I'd just like to know what parts we have in our audience so that our presenters know what sort of terms or what tech to refer to most, because if we have more experienced developers, we might have to align it to the more experienced developers. But if we have beginners, just say I'm a beginner, or just say I'm mid experienced, or I'm an experienced developer. So if you don't mind just unmuting and just saying, I am Ningi, I am a junior developer, or I'm a beginner, or I just want to find out what this event's about. We can start with you, Brian, if you don't mind.
Hello guys, I'm Brian Ugonda doing information security. I'm a junior developer. Thank you.
Wow, thanks, Brian. Anyone else?
I'm Steven Gamira. I'm doing information technology. I'm a beginner. I just want to see what this meeting is all about. Thank you.
Great, great. Thank you so much. Good to hear from you. So I'll just begin. As you can see shared on your screens right now is today's agenda. So web development roadmaps. Saka, this is basically the road you take when you're designing your website or you want to get into web development. So in the previous sessions, which I've been talking about how developers are split into two main groups. So you have your back-end developers, the ones that write your backend code for your databases and all that information, server-side information on your websites. So that's the stuff you don't see. Then you have your front-end developers that are mainly responsible for designing the user interface. So that's the website you see on your browsers. That's the front-end developer's job to make sure that it's eye-catching and it's it looks good. So for both those entities, you have different roads that a developer can take, and that road actually entails you the type of programming language you need to use for a specific module. If you want to just design simple websites, you can just use CSS, but if you want to go into more advanced um, designs, you can use other frameworks as well. There are free frameworks to use like Bootstrap. I'm sure once you start getting into development, you get to understand those and etc. So the gist of things is to just make sure that you understand that there are stages to it, there are phases to it. So without further ado, I'll just get back into my presentation or just start. So web development roadmap. What is a roadmap? Simply, a roadmap is a strategic plan that defines a goal or desired outcome and includes the major steps or milestones needed to reach it. So basically, this is self-explanatory, guys. Ingoli Road, you know, Shandy says a developer. Oh yeah, we just got electricity back. Guide you on the.
Tinashe.
Hello, can you hear me, Rodney?
Yes, I can.
Seems like Tinashe is
Okay.
facing some issues, but is fixing his machine.
Okay, cool.
So I think we'll be back in a bit.
All right. Hi, guys. It's Tinashe. I've just changed my phones. It seems like I'm having challenges with my internet on my laptop, but I can continue from here. As you can see on that slide, I was just talking about the purpose of roadmaps. Can you hear me now? Sorry, before I go on.
Yes, you're not audible.
Great. So, as I was saying, the purpose of these roadmaps is to give you an idea of about the landscape and the guide, and it's to guide you if you're confused about what to learn next, and not to encourage you to pick what's hip and trendy. So, a roadmap will just simply tell you, Kuti, this is what you should learn next, but it won't actually specify the frameworks. It might just suggest to you, Kuti, use this programming language for this, but you might actually have to do your own research in order to find what would be the best programming language in that case. But it will just guide you, good. Okay, if you're done with designing this part, if you're done with your navigation part, just move to the body, etc. So roadmaps come in different shapes and different sizes. It's really up to you to actually find an appropriate roadmap to use and go on from there. So I have a note to beginners about roadmaps. So roadmaps will cover everything that you learn. So when you look at roadmaps, you will find it's this huge document, it's this huge thing with a lot of things you might not know, with a lot of things that are new to you, a lot of new concepts. However, you don't need to panic or to be overwhelmed by what you see because it will simply just tell you, Kuti, this is the road to take, and use a face-by-face approach to things. Always keep a positive mindset. I always say this because once you do that, it means that you don't panic when you see something that's like that huge. And once you have your eyes set on a specific target one at a time, it's actually easier to accomplish your tasks in that way. So I was actually supposed to have 10 minutes. This was just supposed to be an introductory session for me. So without further ado, I just want to introduce they will talk about themselves later when they start presenting. But today we're going to have some of the core team members presenting to you. So we have Lionel, who's my deputy lead and my core lead as well. And we also have Given, who's also part of the core team for the club. So these guys have massive experience. I mean, Leon was already on attachment working for a development company. If he wants to disclose that information, he can do it by himself. And we also have Given, who's been doing a lot with his website. He has a blog that he writes, and I've actually been asking him to share some of the blogs he writes in the group. So I'm sure you've seen them. You've come across them as well. Take some time to look at those, and yeah, do go to him and ask some questions. With how did you create that, or how did you design that? Because this is actually someone who's doing this on a proper and professional scale. So that's why I thought it would be a great idea to have two people with massive experience and with development just talk to you guys about and these are people people in your school, people who are still actually in school and they are still undergraduates, but they're actually doing notable things with their development skills. So without further ado, I think we'll start with Lionel. He's going to take us through the front end roadmap. So Lionel.
Okay, thank you, Tinashe. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Anyone else?
Okay, can you guys see my screen?
No.
Okay, let me try to share again. How about now?
Yeah, it's not okay.
Great. So I hope you guys are all okay wherever you are. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the front-end web development roadmap. So first question, what is front-end web development? So front-end web development means creating client-side applications with which a user interacts with. So for example, what you can see right here, like when I'm clicking file, edit, view, these buttons, drop-downs, they're all developed by front-end developers. Going on to the next slide. Common tasks of a front-end developer. So we've got optimizing user experience using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS to bring concepts to life, developing and maintaining the user interface, implementing design on mobile websites, creating tools that improve site interaction regardless of the browser, managing software workflow, following SEO best practices, as well as fixing bugs and testing for usability. Okay, so from where do I start my coding journey for those of you who haven't started in the front-end web dev industry? So a lot of skills are actually required, but basically to do all these, we need three things, which are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I'm going to define for you HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML just stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which is a combination of hypertext and the markup language, and it is used to give basic structure to a web page. So I'm actually going to show you an illustration of HTML and CSS after I talk about CSS. Then CSS is stands for cascading style sheets, which is used to apply styles to a web page, and it offers plenty of styles to apply to a web page and converts a simple looking web page into an awesome looking piece. So the styles apply to colors, fonts, layout of elements, and many more. So in other words, you can just say CSS is used to bring life to a web page. And if you can actually see on the screen I'm showing, there's a meme there actually showing the difference between using HTML and CSS as compared to just using HTML. So I'm just going to take you to our site. Sorry, let me just share. Can you now see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, Tatiana.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, cool. So if we go here on the DSC page, right, it's developed using HTML and CSS, but I'm going to disable the CSS so that you can see the page without the styling. So if I disable the styles, okay, let me just show you the site. For those of you who don't know the site, yeah, you can see it's formatted very well. Then I'm just going to disable the styles. So can you now see how it looks without CSS? They're just images and paragraphs and headers, but they've got no style. So I think you can now see the importance of CSS. Then going back to the slide, there are CSS frameworks which you can use. So CSS frameworks are a bonus when you're building web app. because they're easier to use and they have better web design because they are pre-made. So you don't actually have to style every component. Some of the components are pre-made, so all you have to do is just customize with your application with what you want to do. So some famous CSS frameworks is Tailwind CSS, which is a utility-first CSS framework packed with classes and tools that can be used, that can be composed to build any design directly in your markup. And it's also not opinionated, meaning that you can actually create your own unique design. Then we've also got Material UI, which is a simple library that allows us to import and use different components to create a user interface. Then, as Tinashe said before, we've got Bootstrap, which is free, and it's an open source CSS framework. So anyone can actually use it free of charge. Then going on to JavaScript. So we talked about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So JavaScript is a cross-platform object-oriented scripting language used to make web pages interactive. JavaScript is used mainly for enhancing the interaction of a user with the web page. So in other words, you can make your web page more lively and interactive with the help of JavaScript. So JavaScript is a broad language, but for beginners, for beginners, you can actually start with the fundamentals, which is the basic syntax, data types, loops. Yeah, those are inevitable parts. You meet those every day when you actually start developing on a professional level. Then you can actually go on to learn about objects, arrays, array methods, functions, and OOP concepts. The other thing to learn is asynchronous programming, and also the DOM, which stands for Document Object Model, which can simply be understood as a tree of nodes created by the browser, whereby each of these nodes has its own properties and methods which can be manipulated using JavaScript. So in CSS, we've got CSS frameworks, right? And also in JavaScript, we've also got frameworks which help us to develop applications faster and make them better to look at. So a JavaScript framework is a collection of JavaScript code libraries that provide developers with pre-written code for routine programming tasks. So the most popular JS frameworks are Angular, React, and Vue. Angular. Let's talk about Angular. Angular is an application design framework and development platform for creating efficient and sophisticated single-page applications. Angular relies heavily on real DOM for its performance, while Vue.js and React function using the virtual DOM. So when you read about DOM, you actually know what the statement means. Then Angular is used by Gmail, Microsoft Office, Upwork, PayPal, and many more. And as a matter of fact, Angular is also backed by Google. So yeah, when you're doing the solution challenge, they require us to use one or more Google technologies. So you can actually use this one because it's by Google. Then as a beginner, you might find Angular a bit more overwhelming than React and Vue. And I can actually testify to this because I started learning React, but when I went to Angular, it had quite a steep learning curve. Then going on to React, this is technically a library used for building user interfaces created by Facebook. So it is also used, it's used by Facebook, Atlassian, Netflix, Code Academy. Yeah. Then when you actually master the basic React, you can actually go ahead and learn Next.js, which is a React framework that enables several extra features, including server-side rendering and generating static websites. Going on to Vue.js, it is an open source progressive JavaScript framework for building user interfaces. The core library is focused on the Vue layer only, and it is easy to pick up and integrate with other libraries or existing projects. So some of the most famous companies which use Vue are Xiaomi, Alibaba, Grammarly, and GitLab. So summarizing HTML, CSS, and JS, we can say that as an analogy, we can say that HTML represents our body structure. For example, the limbs, head, neck, torso, etc. Then CSS, those are skin, eyes, hair color, clothes, etc. Then our JavaScript will be representing our functions like breathing, taking, sleeping, eating, talking, etc., etc. So yeah, those are the basics. Going on, so there are actually more things to learn in front-end web development, and I'm going to just define some of those for you. So we start off with web accessibility, which is the need for websites to utilize tools and technologies developed to aid the perception, understanding, contribution, navigation, and interaction of a person with disabilities on the site. So your site actually has to accommodate everyone, regardless of their age or abilities. Then going on to responsive web design, it is about using HTML and CSS to automatically resize, hide, shrink, or enlarge your website to make it look good on all devices, which can be desktops, tablets, and phones. So if you check sites like Google, they actually fit they actually fit on all the devices, whether you're using a phone or laptop or anything. Then CSS Flexbox. This Flexbox in CSS makes it easy or simple to align items vertically and horizontally using rows and columns. So it actually helps you in developing. You don't have to do all the work. And also the CSS grid, it introduces a two-dimensional grid system to CSS. The other thing you're supposed to learn is ES6, which is ES stands for ECMAScript, which is a standardized scripting language for JavaScript. So the version ES6 came with new features such as let and constant. For those of you who did JavaScript, you actually know that initially there was just var when declaring variables. So now you can actually declare with let or const. Then we've got Git. Git is a software for tracking changes in any set of files, usually used for coordinating work among programmers collaboratively, developing source code during software development. So nowadays, now that there was COVID and people had to work on remote jobs, Git was actually being used more than before. Then GitHub, as a provider of internet hosting for software development, version control using Git. It also offers distributed version control and source code management functionality of Git. Then GitLab is also similar to GitHub, but it's mainly focused on DevOps. On the DevOps lifecycle tool that provides a Git repository manager, this is providing wiki, issue tracking, and continuous integration in deployment pipeline features. So I'm going to share the slide with you so you don't have to worry about writing down the sites which I'm going to talk about. So sites which you can use to practice or learn front-end web development. I just wrote down a few. We've got Code Guide, CodeCamp, Free Code Camp, and Dev Community. Then channels to follow. We've got the New Boston, Privacy Media, Clever Programmer, Papa React, Web Dev Simplified. So having said this, I think I'm done. If anyone has questions, I think Tinashe will actually give you time to ask. Yeah. So thank you for the time, Tinashe.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
As I was saying, thank you so much, Lino, for an awesome presentation on front-end roadmaps. I hope you guys actually learned something there. You was talking about some pretty advanced stuff there. I mean, for beginners, you must be wondering, what are frameworks? You don't even know what that means. So let me just say something and clarify a very simple thing. Put it in simple words for you. You have HTML responsible for adding content to your website. So that's just basic HTML, very simple to learn, very easy to interpret, simple lines of code. Then for that context, you have CSS that is used to style that HTML you have for your websites. So, for instance, you have a Wikipedia page you want to create. You have your text, your about, and etc. But you want to style it. You want to put boxes in. You want to put images in, a navigation bar, etc. Now you have your CSS there. So these are just basically programming languages. You're not installing anything. They're not applications. It's just you writing that code on an IDE or a code editor. So put simply, the frameworks will now be made easier for you to create or style your websites. So I would suggest that you actually jump into frameworks as soon as you understand CSS. Just get the gist of things. You don't have to be a guru at it. Just get the gist of things and how things work. Then from there, you could start learning about frameworks, because they're just made simply to make your life easy. Because development, guys, you don't have to reinvent the circle. The first websites were created with very complex code, yes, CSS, but then people came up with frameworks just to make that easier for people to design websites. So yeah, please do give it some thought. Lano is going to share his slide with you. Go through it, read it, and if you have any questions, guys, the group is open to help you guys. We have a lot of experienced developers in there, a lot of part fours in the group. They're there to help, myself included. Even part threes or twos with experience, they can actually help you. That's if we have any part ones listening to this. So without further ado, I want to allow us to have a Q&A, probably a 5-minute Q&A at the end for people who just want clarification. And this event is just scheduled to last for an hour. So we're going to just go straight to our next presenter, and that's Given, aka Flix Tech. So as I was saying, massive experience behind this guy's name. Just listen to what he has to share. He's going to be talking about the back end. So Lionel was talking about the front end, right? What you see, the designs. I'm sure you saw that presentation he had where he showed you how a website will look without CSS and how it looks with CSS. So that's the front end. So Given is going to talk more about the back end, what we don't see as users, but we know is happening in the background of our websites. So Given, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Tinashe, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I did not prepare a presentation, but I'm just going to use this website as my reference. So I'm just going to talk about the back end. So let me share my screen real quick.
Okay, so just before you start sharing your website, someone in the chat just suggested that we just have a Q&A. We just have a couple of questions asked right now to just ensure that we're on the same page. I think that's a good idea. So whilst you're sorting your website out, Given, let's have a couple of questions from the audience. So just raise your hand, or okay. So just raise your hands or unmute yourselves and just start asking.
Come on, guys. Can you please just say something? Maybe Juliet, Brian, or Steven. Anyone can say something pertaining to what Lionel is actually said. I know that probably there are some people that have one or two questions to ask. Even silly questions, it's okay. It's just part and parcel of the process of learning.
Thank you for that, Atenda.
Okay, I'll just ask on behalf of uh, some people who might be having this question. I think the content that was shared by Lionel uh, was quite overwhelming. So, like, this is a question to Lionel. Do I have to learn everything that you just said for me to call myself a front end developer? I think this is a question that some people might be having here.
Okay, that's a good question, Rodney. Thank you for that. So, as I said before, a lot of skill to be required for you to be called like a 10x front-end developer, but we all start from somewhere, right? I started by developing static sites just using HTML and CSS, just like a portfolio or something which is simple, right? So, for those simple sites, you actually just going to have to know HTML and CSS. But when you want to go and create dynamic sites, that's when you're going to actually learn JS and make your sites better. Did I answer your something wasn't clear?
Okay, I'm answered. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Lionel. And thank you for the question, Rodney. I believe, yeah, most people do have that question. Someone just asked me privately if they have to install HTML or CSS. You actually don't have to install those. They're just programming languages. They're not applications. So you can actually start writing your HTML or CSS code from scratch. That's just how easy it is to make websites. And if you need any assistance with how to start, you can just reach out in the group and we can take it from there. But in the meantime, get yourself familiar with the terms we're talking about. We're talking about front-end development. We're talking about HTML. We're talking about CSS. And you also talked about frameworks. You don't have to learn everything because the programming world is so broad, guys. But just have enough information for you to make something that's complete and something that is usable. And you can start improving your skills from there. And I think that's just the gist of things. Just learn what you can at a time, and just know with programming, you can improve your skills as you go on. You don't have to learn everything all at once. I think that's what I can add to that response as well. So anyway, without further ado, I'm sure Given is now ready to start his presentation, and he can take us through backend. Okay, before we go, Brian has his hand up. You can go ahead and unmute your mic and speak.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say thank you to Lionel. The presentation was amazing, and we are following. Maybe nokukomberawo like the link regroup racho. I think Clinton will antisera inbox like and antisimum group so that we can as well ask some question as we proceed.
Okay, great. I will share the group in the chat just now. The group link.
Thank you.
So, Given, I think you can go ahead now. Hello, Given. Are you still there? I don't think we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, guys. Okay, so as I said before, I know you can scan
Okay, so I think Given is probably having some challenges. Okay, he's back. Yes, we can hear you, Given.
Okay, my audio. Can you? Okay, let me reconnect my screen. Okay, well, yes, I'm waiting for my screen. I was saying, back-end development is what makes mobile applications and websites work. Uh, it is Backend development is how the website works. Let's say when you go to a website and you create an account, the backend is what handles the creating of an account and all that. Let's say right now on Google Meet, right? The backend is what handles the video communications between my browser and your browser and so forth and so forth. That is backend development. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, while this you're waiting for the screen. Yeah, okay. So how do you get started? Where to begin? The very first thing is to understand how the internet works in general. Things like the DNS. The DNS is what handles yeah, it's what resolves human readable names to IP addresses. Let's say, for example, this one is roadmap.sh. It's a domain name. So you need to understand how everything works from entering a domain name and then receiving the web page as a response. And then you also need to know what is HTTP. HTTP is the protocol that is used to transfer data between the browser and uh, the server. And then you also need to know what is web hosting and what are browsers and how they work. You just have to have a general idea of how the internet works. And then you should also have a basic front-end knowledge because most of the time when you are creating a back-end solution, you want to prototype how the front end is going to look, but you also have to create just a basic view of how it's going to look before the front end developer comes to take off. So you should have basic front end knowledge, basic knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Just the basic knowledge. You should also know that. And then the other thing that you should learn are operating systems, just general knowledge of how operating system works, what is process management, threads and concurrents, just the basics. Don't bother yourself with everything. And you should also know memory management, process communication and input management. And then you should also know it's called POSIX basics, standard input and standard output, something like that, piping, just the basics, don't go there. And you should also know basic terminal commands like grep, sed, ls of curl, wget, tailhead, etc., etc. But just the basics. If you are using Windows, you might not have all of these. These are available in Unix systems, Linux or Mac OS. You will find these ones. And then the next thing that you're gonna do is to choose a programming language. Choosing a programming language is just a matter of preference. Personally, I use PHP and Ruby, but mainly I use PHP. Most people use JavaScript and Python. Some people use C Sharp, but you can choose whatever you want. So when you choose a programming language, make sure you learn everything about the programming language, how it works, learning everything from scratch. Don't just jump into a framework or do that. Just learn the basics of the language, learn how it works, learn how to build everything from scratch using that language. Uh, you can use Java, you can use C Sharp, Python, Ruby, JavaScript. Most people like JavaScript because it can also be used for front end development. So most of the time, people would use maybe JavaScript, Node.js, and then they will use React for the front end. Maybe that person will be a full stack developer who's working both on the front end and the back end, but they'll be using one language for everything. Most people like JavaScript. Personally, I don't like writing JavaScript for the back end, but yeah, it's just a matter of preference. You can choose whatever you want. And then after you understand your back end language of choice, the next thing you'll learn is the version control. You should know what is version control and why you should use version control. The most popular version control tool is Git. I think Lionel talked something about it. Say something about Git. Yeah, you should know how to use Git, and then you should also know repository hosting services. GitHub is the most popular solution. Some people use GitLab and Bitbucket. I never use any of them. I just use GitHub. It's the most popular and the most easier one to get started. So I'm sure most of us have at least a GitHub profile and a GitHub account. So you need to know how it works and how version control works. And then we move on to learn databases. The first relational databases, things like PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaDB, MSSQL, and Oracle. My personal preference is MySQL. It pays hand in hand with MySQL. But most people use PostgreSQL. I've never used it before, but most people like it. And then should also learn NoSQL databases, especially if you want to use JavaScript for the backend. Most people use MongoDB is the most popular, and there's RatingDB, CouchDB, DynamoDB. Yeah, you should also be familiar with that. And then you should also learn SQL. Yes, how to write SQL and everything around that. But as time goes on, you won't write much SQL because you'll be using object relational modules, which are called ORMs most of the time. And you should also know ACID properties of databases, transactions, the n+1 problem, and how you can go around it. But this is not mandatory. You just have to have a basic idea. And then moving on, the very idea of database of back-end development is around API. So you should know everything about API. What the RESTful APIs, JSON APIs, and SOAP. I don't think most people are still using SOAP, but personal preferences. And then you should also know API authentication, whether you're going to use cookie-based authentication, open auth, basic authentication, token authentication, JWT, and so forth and so forth. That's it about APIs and authentication. And then the next thing you will learn is caching. Caching is when you save a copy of a website, maybe on a content delivery network, so that your users will have faster access. So you should know what is caching using CDNs, content delivery network, using server-side caching. Most people use Redis. Name cached, I never tried it before. I've only used Redis. And also you can use client-side caching, maybe using storing a copy of the website in the browser, something like that. And then you should also learn web security. This is very important because if the server is hacked, your whole company is just gonna go down and you might lose millions. And then you should know what is MD5 and why you shouldn't use it. And then you should know the SHA family of encryption algorithms, and then script and bicryptation algorithms. And then moving on, you should also know HTTPS and content security policies and cross-origin request forgery. So that's it about web security, but you should be security-wise when you are developing a website. And then there is testing. This is also very important because when you're developing a website, most of the time you are going to miss bugs if you don't test, and those bugs are going to manifest in production. So you should learn integration testing, unit testing, and functional testing. Yeah, but I've never tried the other two. I've only tried unit testing. But you should be familiar with it. And then there is CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous development. So on that one, where is CI/CD? Okay, we'll get to that. And then you should be familiar with the design and development principles. Things like the gang of four design patterns, those are very important. You should learn them. Things like the MVC, the object relational model, things like that. And then domain-driven design, test-driven design. And then the last five are important. The solid principles, the keys pattern, whatever that one is, I can't pronounce that. And then dry, which means don't repeat yourself. This one you're gonna see it most of the time, which is you shouldn't repeat yourself. The code it says that if you keep repeating your code, then you should encapsulate that code into a function or a class, something like that. And then there are architectural patterns. These are patterns of building web applications. There are monolithic applications which are just one application. The backend and the front end are integrated into one thing. And then there are microservices which breaks down each functionality into its own application. Let's say the user management will be on its own thing, the order services on its own thing, and something like that. And then there are service-oriented applications, which are just applications which are just focused on one thing. And then there's CQRS, I don't know what that is. And then there's event sourcing. Event sourcing is still a new concept. I haven't learned it, but I think it's very important when you want to keep track of records of everything that has happened into your application. I'm not quite familiar with it. And then there's serverless. Serverless is also new to me. I don't know how it works, but I think you should learn it. And then there are message brokers. This happens when you want to send real-time messages from one application to another. Let's say in your microservice architecture, right? You want to send a message from a user management to order management. You use these message brokers. Most people use RabbitMQ. Is the most popular one. The last one, I never heard of it. It's still new to me. And then there's containerization. Most people use Docker. I think, have you ever had an application that runs perfectly on a local machine, but when you want to move it to production, it all breaks? The solution to that one is Docker. You containerize the application into a container, and then that container you ship it to production as it is. So with these dependencies and everything. And then there's this thing called GraphQL, which is a substitute to RESTful API. It is a method to transfer data from the server to the client. You should also learn Apollo. That GraphQL, I have no experience with it. I don't know much about it, but it's something that you should look into. And then there are graph databases, which work hand in hand with GraphQL. I don't have experience in GraphQL, but it's something that you should look into. And then there's WebSockets. WebSockets this is what makes this video meeting work. It's communication browser to browser. They don't use HTTP. They use another protocol called WebSockets. I don't know much about them, but I think it's something that you should look into. And then you should also be familiar with web servers. The most popular web server used in production is Nginx. You should know how to create server blocks, how to cache and everything with Nginx. And then there's Apache, and there's the KDE and the Microsoft IIS. But the most popular solution is Nginx for production. And then there's what is called migration strategies. This is something that you should look into later on. if you want to scale. But I think for now this is enough for now. And then I didn't talk about frameworks because it's going to be confusing. There's about a lot of them, and then every language has got its own framework. But a framework is what you're going to use after you understand the language, and then you would then use a framework to make your work easier. But I think for now, this is it, guys. If you have any questions, there will be time for a Q&A. Thank you, Tinashe. You can do your thing.
Thank you so much, Given, for that insightful presentation. I'm sure people, as you were looking at that screen, there's a lot you can, there's a lot to consider about big envy. A lot of new concepts, and to some people, it's something that is familiar, but you might not actually have knowledge on, which is still fine, guys. I was saying, roadmaps are not actually meant to be intimidating, but they're actually meant to help you understand better how things happen at the back end, especially if it's a roadmap for back end like this one. So, without further ado, I don't want to complicate things or confuse you guys. If you have any questions, you can just raise your hand, or you can just start asking your questions. You can direct them to me, or you can direct them to the presenters, whether it's a front end question or a back end question. Just air out your questions. Okay, given there's a question in the chats there. Um Someone just asked, may you share a basic difference between architectural and design patterns?
Okay. All right. Let me see how I can say this one. Uh, the architecture of an application is how the application in general is built. Let's say, for example, the monolithic apps, right? These are the old apps that has got the backend and the front end in the same application. No use of a front end framework or whatsoever. You just the web server just saves HTML, SET, right? Those are monolithic applications. But what happens is, for the monolithic application, you can apply the design patterns to a monolithic application. Let's say I have got my monolithic application, I can apply the solid principles to it. I can apply the drive principles to it. I can apply the gang of four design patterns to it. So that's the difference between the two. I don't know if I answered correctly, but yeah, the design patterns helps you organize your code, how to structure your code, your application in general. But the architectural patterns, they define the whole application, how uh, let me see. The design whole application, how is it going to be structured, the whole thing, the bigger picture of it, and then the design patterns, they define your code. How are you going to structure your code? How are you going to connect to the databases and all that? I don't know if I answered correctly.
Thank you so much, Given. I don't know. Yeah, she just said he's answered. I think that was a detailed explanation. Thank you for that. Any other questions, guys? Okay, so the event was scheduled to last for an hour. Okay, Keith's hand is up. Uh, Keith, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
Okay, thank you. So we have had the presentation on front end and also on back end. So here's a question that might pop up among my fellows in the audience. Okay, so what part do I take for someone as clueless as me, front end or back end? What is the best advice you can give to someone who is clueless as me on whether to take front end or back end or both? I'm asking on behalf of my fellows.
Okay. Thank you so much, Keith, for that. I think to actually help you, we can have maybe 2 or 3 of us answer the question for you. But I will start. So basically, for a developer, especially if you're a beginner, the road you take usually just depends with what interests you the most. But in order to start learning, if you haven't learned anything to do with development, front end is usually the easiest to learn because most of its concepts are very simple. Most of the code behind it is it's simple text. If you want to add context to a web page, it's simple text, adding paragraphs, adding headings, etc. So front end is a bit lighter to program or code, and back end is something you should ease into because it is not as easy and straightforward. But I would like to just say that as a developer, both options are possible for you. You don't have to choose, but I would recommend, this is just a recommendation, a personal recommendation is to start with front end development so that it eases you into what programming is all about. Then you can start handling some back end. However, I believe that a developer at this day and age should possess a little knowledge about both concepts. You should be able to interpret some back-end code as well as front-end code. So this is what I think. Because in the industry, where I'm coming from, attachment is in most of the jobs that I applied for, they didn't want specifically a person who was good at front end, they wanted a person who was good at both. So that you are versatile in the company. You are able to be transferred to any department and still be useful. So I would encourage the beginners to just look at front end first, but with hopes of learning back end. I think those are my thoughts. Anyone wants to pitch in there? I think Rod.
Yeah, actually wanted to contribute towards this too. So I actually agree with you, Tinashe, on that one. I think I would recommend everyone to just start with learning front end, whether you want to be a back-end developer, just start to learn front end. You might not have to dig deep into it, but just learn the basics so that you at least understand how a website works. And then I think you will be able to contribute more towards the back end if you know how the front end works. Then, so whether you want to be a back end or a front end developer, I think learn both first. So I'd recommend taking classes in both. So, and it's also about personal preference. So just take classes in both, then see what interests you. And when it comes to front end, it deals more with designs and layouts. So if that interests you, you probably enjoy the front end. Then the back end would deal more with some logical stuff, database, etc. But I've had people saying, Koti, front end diagonal programming, that's a big lie. I used to think so too. But now when you get to using frameworks, now that I've used Angular, I've used React, there is programming called front end, object oriented JS, even when using an Angular object-oriented programming principles as you get to use them. So I think you just have to learn programming to even without going back front end. And I've also read another article which was talking about the great divide, because people think front end akuna like programming. So it was talking about two front end developers that were in a bar, but they had nothing to talk about. Why? Because like the other person was into side programming and all that. The other person was into like more of designing than like the UI UX shit. So yeah, I would recommend learning both. First, take classes in both, see what interests you, then go for that. I think that's what I have to say pertaining to that.
Well, I think I'm answered. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rodney, for your insight. I actually like that we have the same thought of process there. And given you once at some point you had your head up, did you want to just say something there? Because I believe you are also a full stack developer.
No, I think the question is being answered. But I just want to add that it's just your preference. Whatever interests you, just go there. But yeah, just choose anything you want. Start anywhere. Start with backend, start with front end, whatever kicks in. That's it.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for that. Any other questions, guys? Tatenda, you've got your hand up, and go ahead.
It's not actually a question though. I was actually trying to support a point of Rodney, what Rodney actually said. Most people actually think that front end development is not much of a hassle, but it's not only about CSS, HTML, and all. I actually discovered recently when I actually thought front end is all about HTML and CSS and JavaScript, but it comes into hand in hand with state management, which is actually quite a hassle. So basically, this thing of front end is actually more of big hassle as much as people consider doing back end. I think front end is also a huge big deal that people should take into account of. It's actually a lot of coding that exists there. It's not only HTML, it's not only CSS. CSS is only the basic concept that people will actually learn, though it's important, but there is much more detailed information pertaining to front-end coding. More of state management, more of what. It's actually plenty of stuff. So people should actually consider maybe they're interested though, that personal interest, zvanoda zvanofarira kuita. It's all about passion. Vanhu vazhinji vanofarira maybe zvinhu kungoona chinhu chichinja backend though you can see much of a change, but it's actually the functionality. But though vamwe vanhu vanongofarira kuona chinhu chingoappear more changes zvichiitika. So pafront end hamusafungidzira kuti haina basa, chinhu chitori very 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 vital. It's a vital element inofanira kuconsider development.
Thank you so much, Tatenda, for that. Great stuff, man. Okay, so you heard that. Sorry, before we move on, Keith, your hand is up. You want to add something or say something there?
Okay, I have a question, another question on front end and back end. Okay, so someone would want to know how these two work together. Like in basic terms, how does the front end and the back end work together hand in hand? How do they meet? Where do we say like they are now actually working together? Thank you.
Okay, given.
So what happens is from the back end, you create an API, which is an application programming language, which is a fancy way of saying that the back end will just give the data, raw data. In most cases, it will be JSON. Formerly, they will be using XML, but nowadays it's mostly JSON or GraphQL. So, and then in your front end, the application, maybe you'll be using something like React or Vue.js, right? You then check that data, you make an API request, an HTTP request to the back end. You get the data in form of JSON. You put it in a state, maybe you'll be using Redux or Vuex or whatever they use nowadays. You put that data in the state, right? After putting it in the state, and then you then display it in the browser, in the cards or whatever the display you have. And then this data is mostly reactive. When when the data changes, when you fetch another data from the back end, it will be then automatically updated from the design. That's the basic idea of how it is. So you fetch the data from the back end, you make an API request, and then you get the database as JSON or XML. You put that data in the JSON, and then you manipulate it. I hope you answered.
Yeah, just to support given on that, on basic terms, sorry for giving this bad example. Maybe I will consider saying front end is more like a car, like the appearance of a car that we see, be it Mercedes Benz. It's actually appealing from the inside, from the outside actually. When we see a beautiful car, we say this car is actually beautiful. A Benz, be it a Honda Fit and all. What we actually see from outside perspective, that's the car anatomy. So what happens by this car? With actually major functions which are actually occurring inside the car. We have the engine inside that car, which is actually performing some mechanic. What do I call it? Functioning in English, mukati pisana fuel and all like that. Major function in English, we concept one. Like every major function in English, mukati engine, motor, sorry for using Shona. But anyway, I think you get the concept of saying that a front end is basically what you actually see. Then back end is actually the part which is actually inside the car, the engine part, everything, the valves which is inside that which we cannot actually see. In this case, you can say this may be the databases. This can be the models that we cannot see, but this relates to the backend part. So this backend part will then interact with outside things that us people we can actually interact with. For instance, for us to communicate with the database, we have to use more of like my forms at no filler. Those forms becomes the front end part, which actually help us to interact with what with the back end. Same as the principle of this example, bad example that I've actually given. Forgive me for that. I think you answered.
Yeah, that was quite understandable. Thank you.
Great. Great discussion there, guys. I'm glad you're actually learning something. And thank you for the questions. They will actually help our audience on YouTube who couldn't ask their questions here. I'm sure most of them, will, after watching the video, will have similar questions because it's basically your beginners and your junior developers having the same questions you're having right now. So I think we're going to entertain one more question before we go, just for the sake of not leaving anyone behind. So you can use the chat to ask your questions, or you can just raise your hand and you can start talking. So the floor is open.
I think there's a raised hand somewhere there.
Sorry, didn't get that part. Sorry, didn't get that part.
Mr. Makaos, you can go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you. It's not really a question, but it's a general comment. I was noticing people asking basically in terms of front end and back end, and basically which paths should they take and how should they learn. I think the best approach of learning is after listening to the talk, after having your questions answered, it's important to get your hands dirty. What do I mean by that? Find a small challenge, the simplest one you can think of. You'd find that for most web applications, they do have a front end. So to do the front end, you then discover you need to learn some basic HTML. So I'd say just go through the basic HTML tags for about 15, 30 minutes. Don't spend the whole day or try to learn them all. Just learn the basics. Then start building that simple application. Once you've reached a stage where you've built that simple application, for example, if you're building something that displays products on a page, you then discover that as you develop it, it's not productive or feasible to be adding all your products manually in the code. What do I mean? You don't have to be adding code every time you want to add a product. Then you Google and find out how then do you have products in your system. Then you learn something about a database. You create your database. From there, you start looking at how do I then link the data that's in my database to the front end. Then you learn that there's something called an API. From there, once you've covered that full spectrum, you find another small project and you do it again. Once you've done it maybe 3, 4, 5 times, that's when I can say you can safely discover whether your passion is in pursuing the front end or the back end or the dev operations. Generally, that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your comment. I believe that can actually help a lot of people as well. Thank you so much. That was very insightful. And allow me to just acknowledge Mr. Makawasi, who was just shared with us. He is our club patron and also a lecturer with the school, and he is the dean of our faculty as well, that's information technology. So it's very good to have you, sir, just to offer your guidance and overlooking the club as well. And I'm sure most, if not all of us, really appreciate you taking your time and just being a mentor to the club and just being a guide and a light as well for us. So thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for your insight. So without further ado, I'm sure some people would need to go and get their food settled for tonight. And so I don't hold all of you back. We can continue the discussion in the group. We can you can go ahead and ask your questions. If you have any more questions, you can ask them in there. And we can actually start helping each other from there. But for now, I believe we've reached the end of our presentation, and I can say this session is adjourned. The meeting was being recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel along with the 2 other sessions we had in the past. I just wanted to compile them so that you have one full web development video there with you. So just go check it out if you want to revise some of the stuff we discussed in here. So for now, that's goodbye to everyone. See you in our next session, and God bless you.
Hi guys, can Lionel and Given share their PPT on WhatsApp chat?
Who's Stephen Paul? Hi, Stefan. Do you have a question? I hope it's Stefan or Steven. Always never get that right. Okay, he just left, so he didn't have a question. Okay, guys, you can go and leave.